but rather than just our stories, we thought it would be a good idea to try to put together something like this so that you can hear directly from people who know what they're really talking about when it comes to hurricane preparedness, and who are really invested in your knowing as much as possible if a storm approaches. So we decided to go ahead and put together this forum, which, by the way, is being live streamed to all 16 newspaper sites for Gannett, USA Today, Florida Network throughout the state at the same time you guys are sitting here. So please be on your best behavior. And let me also go ahead and real quick thank our sponsors, Florida Power and Light, Florida Window and Doors, and of course Palm Beach State College, which is our host facility here. So that said, I wanted to invite up Abby Ross from Palm Beach State to come and say a couple of words and welcome you as well.
Good evening, and thank you all so much for being here, and thank you to our, pardon me? Oh, thank you. And thank you to our esteemed panelists. Forgive me, my back to you. We just wanted to say thank you all for coming, and we're proud to be hosts of this event, and thank you to all of our sponsors as well. We also want to just thank Director Guthrie and all of our VIPs and esteemed panelists here. Right here in our public safety complex, for those of you who haven't been here before, this is where we train our first responders, many of whom largely stay in our community, our EMS, EMT, firefighters, police, all kinds of criminal justice folks, including our police dispatchers, and so on and so forth. So it's really important work that we do here. We're really proud of the work we do. We're very proud of the folks that we train. And again, most people, we say, if you encounter someone in police, fire, or EMS, which of course hopefully you don't, because those are usually emergencies that none of us want to have, you will likely encounter someone who graduated from Palm Beach State College. So please, feel free to reach out to us if ever you want a tour or want to know more information about what we do and the product that comes out of here, because we're very proud of it. So I think that's all I wanted to say, but we just want to really reiterate the message of disaster preparedness and how important it is. And it comes in so many forms. It's not just hurricanes, as we all know. We've seen tornadoes throughout our state at higher rates than I think any of us ever thought could possibly happen in Florida, and so many other issues like flooding, especially as we enter our rainy season. So just take heed of the warnings and information, and we're really grateful for all of you being here. And again, thank you to our panelists.
Thank you, Abby. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists real quick so Kim can go ahead and do her thing. I'm going to go from left to right. But first, Tommy Stroud, trying to read without my glasses here, Executive Director and Engineer of the Lake Worth Drainage District. Hold your applause until I'm all done. And Jamie Molnar, Executive Director of Emergency Preparedness for Florida Power and Light. Mary Blakeney, she's got a long title, Director of Palm Beach County Public Safety Department's Division of Emergency Management. Brian Norcross, who really doesn't need any introduction, but Fox Weather's hurricane specialist, but most notably, someone who guided most of South Florida through Hurricane Andrew. Thanks for being here, Brian. And Kevin Guthrie, Executive Director of the Florida Division of Emergency Management. Thank you for being here too. And of course, our moderator, Kimberly Miller, weather reporter extraordinaire for the Palm Beach Post and the USA Today Network, Florida. Kim, take it away.
I've just got a short spiel here. Who was here during the 2004-2005 hurricane seasons? Okay, so we've got quite a few hurricane veterans in the audience. Almost every part of the state was impacted that year. Interestingly enough, Palm Beach County has not had a landfalling hurricane since David in 1979. But what 2004 and 2005 taught us is that you don't need to have a landfalling storm to be impacted. After those 2 years, I remember hearing people say, well, no one dies in hurricanes anymore. We've got impact glass, we've got Hurricane Andrew buildings, we've got iPhones in our pocket that can tell us to the minute almost when it's going to rain in our backyard. We have social media informing us, the font of all wisdom, Facebook. We also didn't have any hurricanes for 10 years. And then they came back with a vengeance, right? 2016, we had Hermine. 2017, Irma. 2018, Category 5, Michael. 2019, Dorian. It didn't hit us, but came really close. Very uncomfortable. 2022, Ian. And 2023, Idalia. And people did die, 150 in Ian. So that's one of the reasons we're here today. We hear it's going to be a busy hurricane season, 30 named storms possibly. That's double the average. But we have our experts, and we don't need to be scared because we just need to listen to what they say. So we're just going to get started. I'm going to ask questions. We're going to have a great panel discussion. If you guys have questions, if you wrote them down, my editor, Antonio, is right here. He's going to pick up the cards, or we'll get you a microphone if you didn't write it down. And we're going to talk about the mother of all low-pressure systems, hurricanes, which are just a fact of life in Florida. Brian, I just wanted to start with you quickly. If you guys have not read Brian's book about Hurricane Andrew, it is such a fascinating read into what was going on behind the scenes in August 1992. But we want to know what's going on right now in the atmosphere that's making it such a hyperactive forecast. And if you've ever seen something like this before, this kind of setup.
So thanks, Kim. Thanks for everybody for having me here. Really appreciate it. It's good to see you all. So first of all, let me just say about this forecast of 25, 30 storms that you hear all these big numbers this year. It's a great thing because, boy, are a lot of people interested in actually talking about hurricanes early in the season and not waiting until there's actually a threat. So, on one hand, that is a good thing, the fact that there is all this energy out there talking about it. So what is causing these forecasts to be like this? And the answer to your question, Kim, is the weather pattern, especially the oceanographic pattern, where the hot water is, the warm water, extremely warm water, record warm water in the Atlantic, is unprecedented. We have never seen both the pattern and the degree of warmth in the Atlantic. We saw the pattern last year, but it was, in spite of the fact it was record warm last year, it is even warmer this year. Warm water means energy for hurricanes. In the Pacific, you have El Nino and La Nina, and anybody that follows hurricanes have heard those words. Just think of El Nino as being negative for the development of strong storms. La Nina is usually positive or conducive for the development of storms. Last year we had an El Nino. That kept the storms out of the Caribbean. There were no storms in the Caribbean last year. Kept the Gulf almost storm-free, although we did have Idalia, and kept them away from Florida. This kind of persistent upper-level wind pushing from west to east did both things. Kind of cut off the storms in the western part of the Atlantic basin, and it turned storms north. We don't have that this year. We have the opposite this year. So this year we have a very conducive Atlantic and a conducive Pacific, and that's why the numbers are higher. So yes, we've had a conducive both before, but we've never had this extreme situation in the Atlantic. Now, right now, obviously here we are into June and nothing is developing, and nothing's going to develop anytime soon here right away. Maybe later in the month it becomes a little more conducive. The weather pattern is really unusual in that everything is pushed way far south. So we actually had a cold front come through here some days ago. If you notice, the humidity dropped. It's kind of back up now, but the humidity dropped. It was really beautiful. That was actually a cold front in June. Really unusual. So cold fronts are coming farther south. The tropical activity is pushed way south, and so it just hasn't kicked in yet. But what happens in June has essentially nothing to do with what happens in August, September, and October. Every expectation continues to be that it will be a busy hurricane season once the tropics get into regular mode, because they have more energy to make storms stronger, either develop where they wouldn't have developed with normal water temperatures, or get stronger.
So you're talking about water, and we know that storm surge and even now freshwater flooding is one of the biggest killers. Storm surge and then freshwater flooding, because the storms are carrying so much more rain. Tommy is in charge of keeping us dry at the Lake Worth Drainage District, And one thing that Ken Graham, the Hurricane Center director, used to say is, never say it's just a Category 1 or it's just a tropical storm. And we, in your packets, if you pick one up, we do have a picture of Tropical Storm Isaac that flooded Wellington. So could you just talk a little bit about your role at the Drainage District and what the district does, and then maybe what happened with Isaac?
Lake Worth Drainage District is a special taxing district, single purpose. Its sole mission is to provide drainage for southeastern Palm Beach County. About half the population of Palm Beach County resides within the Lake Worth Drainage District, pretty much extending from Boca Raton on the south up to portions of West Palm Beach in the north. And we have a series of canals, about 500 miles, that were designed when the agency was created by the legislature in 1915. The engineers that designed it had graph paper, pencils, and slide rules. That was it. They designed a system that was incredibly robust because of the uncertainty. They didn't have a lot of data, but they knew the threat from tropical systems. And that system has served this part of Palm Beach County for over 100 years. We react to all kind of weather systems. Right now we're pumping water like crazy because it's dry, but we're on the threshold of an active hurricane season, so we're preparing to move water in large quantities based on those forecasts as we see storms develop. So our staff is like a 24/7 operation. We have computer automated systems, we have backup generators, all for the purpose of being able to move large quantities of water on short notice and do it as rapidly as possible. The goal is to keep water out of your homes and businesses. It's very common to see flooding in streets. Don't park your car in the street if you hear a tropical storm or hurricane is coming, because there could be flooding there. But the objective of the system that was designed in 1915, the new developments and the criteria for stormwater developed by Florida Department of Environmental Protection and South Florida Water Management District, to keep the water in your lake systems, in your stormwater systems, and out of your homes.
Great. So let's stay on the topic of water. And maybe Kevin or Mary, you can talk about how decisions are made on evacuations. Because is it water or wind? Most people think wind when we talk about hurricanes.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for hosting this. It's wonderful when we can get in front of our local residents and talk about what we do and how we make the decisions. So I commend all of you for coming out today, and those that may be watching to want to get educated. So when we issue evacuation orders, with the exception of individuals that live in manufactured mobile homes, basically, we evacuate those individuals because of the threat of wind. Because we don't want them to be in a structure that maybe could be compromised from extreme wind. But any other evacuation orders we issue is due typically to our anticipated storm surge inundation. And we work very closely with our partners at the National Hurricane Center and the National Weather Service to determine what that impact is going to be to our community. And our local weather service office will get down to the community level and let us know what they anticipate based on the storm, whether it's going to be heavy rainfall, whether we're going to have excessive storm surge. So that is the determination that drives our decision making for issuing evacuation orders. And we don't take those decisions lightly. There is a lot of thought that goes into that. And individuals need to know that we're looking at that information for that particular storm. We're not looking at the 04 and 05 season of what happened. We're not even looking at the last storm. We're looking at the threats and hazards from the current storm that's approaching, and that is what's driving our decision making. And those decisions are difficult because we don't want individuals to have to leave their home if they don't have to. So, and that's why we say when we make that decision to issue evacuation orders, we want people to heed those warnings, because there is a lot of research, data, and information sharing that goes into that decision making.
One thing I'll add, just from a inland perspective, and of course Mary's been doing this a long time here in Palm Beach, but for those viewers that are all across the state, part of the know your zone, your evacuation zone, and then there's another portion of that is know your home. And it's very, very important for people to understand their home and their community. especially if you're in inland areas. Let's say you're in Orange County, Orlando, Lake County, etc. If it floods at your house when it rains, and then you see a storm that's going to come, like a Hurricane Ian, that's going to dump 18 inches of rain, you need to. There's no model for that, right? So if it floods at your home when it rains, and you're going to get 18 inches of that, then you probably need to go ahead and evacuate for the freshwater side of the house. We do really good job on the storm surge modeling, on the evacuation, the traditional evacuation zones across the state of Florida. And I want to reiterate what Mary said. The single decision that a local emergency manager probably just goes over and over and over in their head more than any other decision in a disaster is when to issue the evacuation order. That is, you're either going to be a hero or you're going to be a zero when it comes to that. And the community, if it wasn't what they predicted and they didn't need to evacuate, then you're going to judge your emergency management director based on that evacuation order. So I just want to give that a little bit of context to say, look, if Mary, in this case for Palm Beach, or any of the other 66 out of 67 county directors call for that evacuation order, you can rest assured it's been thought of long and hard, and it's not something that they really want to do, because we have to make decisions based on the best information we have at the time, and that's not always going to be, and probably 99% of the time, not going to be a full picture. So just know that they've had a lot of anxiety and angst over that.
Hey, Kim, could I ask a question about the drainage situation?
Yes.
So is there, if the water levels are at where you want them to be at the beginning of hurricane season, is there an amount of rain that the system can take before you're going to get, significant flooding and you just can't deal with it? I mean, we saw what happened in Houston with Harvey.
Right.
They had up to 5 feet of rain, right? Now, you wouldn't, that was in a fairly isolated place, but widespread 3 to 4 feet.
Right.
I mean, I assume that our systems here couldn't take 3 to 4 feet of rain either,
No
or
way.
even 2 feet probably.
Right. No, the systems are designed based on a statistical rain event once in 25 years, 3 days. It's about 8 to 10, some cases 12 inches. And you expect to see the ponds full, water in your streets, water coming in your yard, but again, the homes are safe. But when you get beyond that, 15, 20 inches of rain, that's pretty much the limits that the system can handle, and you can expect severe flooding and maybe even flooding in homes. Examples of that aren't necessarily hurricane related, but we've seen two. 2014, Kings Point was flooded, had 22 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. Not long ago, the same thing happened in Fort Lauderdale at the airport. Those are far beyond the capacity of most drainage systems to handle. So we have to be prepared for those as well.
So I remember talking about Broward County now, not Palm Beach County, but Broward County. And because there's a ridge there, right? So everything that is west of I-95, say, or somewhere in the I-95 Federal Highway US 1 area, that's all downhill to the west, right? So that used to be Everglades out there. And people that know Broward County, there's a road called Pine Island Road. It's called an island because it used to be an island out there, but it's a main road right now. And the idea was, if it rained some excessive amount, a couple of feet out there, it would take a month for that water to drain, right? You can only drain it at an inch or two a day or something. It's a pretty slow process, isn't it? If you really have flooding above the ground to get it out to the ocean, it's what is your rate in Palm Beach County?
Palm Beach County in the urban areas is about 3 inches a day, which is pretty significant. Agricultural areas is 3/4 of an inch a day. So for a typical major storm event in our region, we can recover from flooding within 48 hours, 72 hours, to where it's accessible. People can start to get out of their homes. So
Unless you have 3 feet.
if you have several feet of rain, it's going to take significantly longer. Yeah.
Okay, great. So can you guys talk, just back to evacuations quickly, about shadow evacuations and maybe what happened with Irma?
Well, I'll start with that because I think we ended up having to deal with that at the state probably more so than at a local level. But we over evacuated Hurricane Irma by about 3 million people. So just let that number sink in. So 3 million more people evacuated than what needed to. They were not in evacuation zones. They were in post 2004, actually for this area post 1998-ish Florida Building Code, or what was the Miami-Dade Building Code at the time. They did not need to evacuate. Now, there are certain needs that individual households have, such as you may be electrical dependent. In a storm, you're going to lose your power. And, with our partners at FPL and Duke and TECO and so on, we amassed, with their help, 40,000 electrical workers. They got 85% of the power restored in Hurricane Ian impacted areas in 48 hours. That's never been done before in the history of the United States. And again, FPL was very, very strong there. But you're going to lose power. If you're an individual that has to have power, then yes, certainly you need to make that decision to evacuate for your household if you're outside of an evacuation zone. But we had way, way too many people leaving, and then they end up on I-95, the turnpike, heading north, US 27, US 98, heading north, and people turned around and came back home that, realistically, did they need to evacuate in the first place? No. What we want people to do is evacuate. The other thing to this is we want people to evacuate tens of miles. The days, there's a little bit of age up here, except for the ladies, obviously, but I'm from Jacksonville, Florida, and I know that one of your Florida Times Union picks up on this. So I'm from Jacksonville. In the 1970s and 80s, my mom and dad, their plan was to go from Jacksonville, Florida, all the way to Atlanta, Georgia, 370 something miles to evacuate from a storm that may come in. I was a Donna, Dora, David kind of child. Well, that scared people, and they figured go all the way to Atlanta, you'll have a hotel or whatever it's going to be. We do not need to do that anymore. You just need to get, in Florida, we have the best building code. We have the highest rated building code in the United States and probably in the world. We score a 95. I saw this on some factoid in a mass media kind of tidbit, but we scored a 95 out of 100. Nobody else came close to us on the Florida Building Code. So the Florida Building Code works. So what you need to do is get from where you're at to a safe structure, period. Now, I'll probably kick this over to Mary right now, but what we want you to do is evacuate your friends and family, right? That's the first step. Is if you have to evacuate to friends and family, and then I'll let Mary talk more about the sheltering process and those things of last resort in the evacuation.
Absolutely. So, there's inherent risk with evacuating just in general, car accidents, you name it. And the reason we tell people to prepare to stay home if they don't have to evacuate are for all of these reasons we talked about. If your street's flooded, but your home's safe, be prepared to be shut in at home, right? Be ready for that. We don't want people to evacuate if they don't have to, but if you have to, if you're in that situation, we do offer sheltering for residents to go to, but I'm going to tell you, you're going to want to go to family and friends first, because unless you like 20 square feet of a gymnasium floor next to somebody you don't know, then have at it, right? But we do provide a safe structure. We provide food. We provide hydration, but it's not comfortable, right? It's not the comfort creatures of home. It's not the comfort creatures of your friend or family member's home. So we encourage you to make those plans, have those decisions made now, so that you're not forced last minute to be in that situation if you are told to evacuate, to go to a shelter. But if it is your only choice and you have nowhere else to go, we want you to go there. Do not stay home if you're told to evacuate. We do not want people in their home in a storm surge area, and we do get the storm surge. Please heed those warnings if we ask for people to evacuate.
Can I talk about storm surge a second?
Yes, please.
So storm surge is the words are common now, right? We know the words, and because we've seen Hurricane Ian and we see the Gulf in that case that rose up 15 feet and plowed through Fort Myers Beach and essentially destroyed Fort Myers Beach. Well, on the east coast of Florida, we don't get as much storm surge as on the Gulf Coast. Storm surge is driven by a lot of things, but a key component is how shallow the floor underneath of the water, underneath of the Gulf, underneath the ocean is offshore. And on the East Coast, we have a big shelf not too far offshore. So what that does is that pushes the energy that's coming from the ocean toward the land up, so we get bigger waves. So on the Gulf Coast, you get higher water pushing farther inland. On the East Coast, you get higher waves. So along the southeast coast of Florida here, we can get a storm surge of like 10 feet. In 1926, the water came over Miami Beach, completely over Miami Beach, and the ocean met the bay. And obviously that was this giant hurricane. So a big hurricane, like a 1926, Ian was a medium big hurricane. These bigger size hurricanes like Katrina was a big hurricane across, produced tremendous storm surge. So we can get it here. Now, the issue is predicting it in advance, because the storm surge is extremely dependent on exactly where the strongest winds are. But Mary's got to order evacuations, 48 hours-ish? Is it 48? Or you're going to start talking about them in that time frame anyway, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and it all depends on the time of day the storm is coming in
Right.
as well.
Because you don't want to evacuate in the middle
During
of the
the
night.
daylight.
Right, you want them to do it during the day. Right, so you have to do this in advance. Well, in advance, we don't know precisely where the storm is. So the National Hurricane Center is taking into account the uncertainty in the size of the storm, in the intensity of the storm, in the angle that it's approaching the coast, because all these affect where the maximum storm surge is. And so they issue hurricane warnings and storm surge warnings for larger areas than end up getting it, just because even though they're the best in the world at what they do, we can't make precise forecasts 2, 3, 4 days in advance. We all know that, right? So that means that we have to over evacuate by just the way the system works, because it takes time to get people to safety. So storm surge is a giant, complicated problem, and now in the modern world that we have so many people and so much wealth and so many things that are at risk if the ocean water rises and pushes into Lake Worth and pushes up the canals and pushes ocean water inland. It's a huge difficult problem that we haven't dealt with here in Southeast Florida in a long time, right? I mean, really, here in Palm Beach County, the two benchmark storms are 1928 and 1949, right? Those are the benchmark storms, right? But Palm Beach County, there's film of downtown West Palm Beach flooding in the 1926 Great Miami Hurricane. That was such a giant storm, back when we used to have these giant storms, like Irma, actually, but it came from a different angle. So storm surge we live in a storm surge zone here, and we have to behave like we understand that, even though it's very, very complicated. Let me just say one. I just wrote a big post this morning, by the way. If you go on my Facebook page, you can read it about the evacuations and all that. One of the, I think, and I'd be interested in both of you guys' take on this, is high rises. So the high rises we build here, as Kevin said, the modern ones are built like battleships. They're not going to fall down in any kind of hurricane. But if you're in one and you're near the coast and the storm surge comes in, and let's say you do the right thing and you go down to the second or third floor in the hallway and ride it out there. Nobody should stay in their apartment during a storm surge in a high rise. But second or third hallway, you're going to be fine, except that there's going to be debris. You're not going to be able to get out of your building. There'll be no power, no water, maybe no communications. And you're stuck in your building. And until you guys can go and clean it up, right, and get access. So that, I think, is an undiscussed issue, because people feel safe in these modern buildings. They can't hardly open the sliding glass door. It's like a bank vault, but they feel safe, but they can get stranded.
Well, we just had this in Tallahassee in the tornadoes. We lost power there in Tallahassee for about 5 days, but we had a 3-story senior living community, right? Now there was not a whole lot of advance warning. That we did have the enhanced level that was coming in, but a lot of people don't really understand tornadoes, and I know this is a hurricane segment, so we'll stay focused on that. But the principle is the same. A lot of people in that senior living facility were on the 3rd floor. The power went out for 5 days. They physically could not get down. Now, this was not a nursing home. It wasn't an assisted living facility, but there were people that physically could not go 3 flights of stairs to get down. So we ended up having to call paramedics in and get them, transported down and take them to a shelter and things like that. But that's a very, very recent example of what Brian's talking about. And I think there's a second thing that I'll mention here in just a second. But it's vertical evacuation. How many of you all in here live in a condominium? You live in a high rise, right? So imagine that elevator going out, and imagine you have to come down 3, 4, 5, 10 stories to the bottom. And when you get to the bottom, you may be stepping into local ponding water. You may step into, depending on where you're at, you may step into sand. You may not be able to get your vehicle out from underneath the parking garage that's underneath the building, so on and so forth. Those are all things that you have to take into consideration. That's a part of that know your home piece of know your zone. Again, we recommend, and I believe Mary is the same way, if the high rise is in the evacuation zone, evacuate. Don't go up, go out, right? So make sure you're doing that. The second thing is, and Brian did a very, very good job of articulating the difference between the shelves that we have. However, I don't want you to take that as some portion of safety. The thing that keeps me up at night, the very first disaster that I had, I was winding out COVID, but the first disaster I had as the director of the Division of Emergency Management was a Surfside building collapse. That ultimately was water generated, water erosion, degradation generated. I'm very, very concerned about the 1970s and 80s, specifically construction of high rises. The ones that were built here in the 50s were, they're tanks. But then we lost some building consistency and continuity as we went into the 70s and 80s, and of course they call that era the cocaine cowboys that were building those buildings here in Southeast Florida. I learned that from Surfside. And then we got the Florida Building Code back, which now we're building tanks again. But I am really, really concerned about a 10, 12, 15-foot seas, wave action, coming and pounding over and over and over this 1970s, 80s, early 90s construction. And then do we end up having another building collapse? Again, the last place you want to be when that's happening is on 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 10th floor. And then ultimately we would lose the foundation out from underneath a home. This actually happened in Daytona Beach Shores. We didn't have the building collapse, but I have pictures on my phone where I could show you we had 1/3 of the foundation completely washed out from underneath the high rise, and that high rise was not pinned. So it had that Hurricane Nicole continued to batter Daytona Beach Shores, that condo would have come down. So I think that's very, very important. I don't know if Mary's got any follow-up to any of that.
No, I would agree. I would echo everything in that point. And, if that building is in that evacuation zone, that means everybody in that building should evacuate, not just the individuals on the lower levels. So that's definitely, I would echo everything Kevin just said.
So I just wanted to go back to something you said about Hurricane Ian and getting the electricity back on pretty quickly. If everybody was here in 2004 and 2005, some of us went 2 weeks without electricity. That was 20 years ago. So, and I know FPL has done a lot of work to harden the system. So Jamie, can you just tell us maybe just briefly what you guys have done, and then what people should expect after the storm? How long should they, I know it depends on the storm, but how long should they be prepared for?
Absolutely. So you're correct. The 04-05 hurricane season was really a turning point for FPL, and it was the birth of our hardening programs that have really allowed us to look at the way we engineer our infrastructure. And absolutely no grid is going to be storm-proof. Mother Nature is incredibly powerful. However, we've made some incredible investments since that 04 and 05 season and continue to learn, not only in the strength of our infrastructure, looking to make the strength of our poles to stand up against extreme wind loading, right? And to make sure recently in undergrounding some of our neighborhood lines so that we're avoiding some of those vegetation outages, as we often see in the storm. Investments in smart grid technology that allows some self-healing capability to reduce the extent of the outage. Those investments really have helped, as you mentioned, the restoration time that you saw in the 04-05 hurricane season to what you mentioned just a couple of years ago with a massive storm like Ian, and being able to restore so quickly. It's because of the investments that we're making year round to build a more resilient grid. Again, no grid is stormproof. Mother Nature's incredibly powerful, but we want to make those investments, and also we have a tried and true restoration engine. It's been battle tested here in Florida, and we really look at a couple of things happening at once. One, we want to make sure that we are working on restoring facilities that get the communities up and running quickly. So we work with local municipalities and government officials to understand what's important. Where should we be focusing that attention? Usually that is, emergency centers, hospitals, nursing homes, critical medical facilities, but also grocery stores, gas stations, things of that nature to make sure that the residents in that community can get out and get the supplies that they need to get back up and running. And then we are working to make sure that we're impacting the most people that we can in restoring an outage, getting those main feeder lines, those main community lines back on first, and then working up absolutely all the way to the meter. We do hold a certain amount of our crews in our EOCs to make sure that we can handle, partnering with those different county and community emergency response also so that we are able to address any concerns, any requests that they have. And then, finally, we really absolutely want to make sure that we understand what's critical to the community and make sure that we get out there and do that absolutely safely and as quickly as possible.
I want to add one thing to that, and something we did in Hurricane Ian, and FPL was at the center of this along with Duke Energy, and that was FPL and Duke have got just a ton of resources, and they got their stuff restored very quickly in Hurricane Ian. And sometimes we don't really know what our government leaders do for us that make a difference. But I think this was one of those tangible things that the governor made a decision in Hurricane Ian that he was going to pay FPL and Duke and TECO, those private independent-owned utilities, to come in and help the municipal electric associations and the cooperative electric associations. That had never been done before in the history of the state. And that is your government in action doing something very positive. That cost us millions of dollars, taxpayer dollars, millions of dollars. But we got the power restored. 85% of the power was restored to Hurricane Ian individuals in 48 hours. And then we had 90% restored in about 96 hours. That's a huge thing. And I think times like this, when we talk these town halls, you need to know that your government is actually doing positive things and making things that make sense and do common sense type approach. But again, I know Manny at the time, and I think Manny's retired now, but I used to call him the power czar. But he is, that the team that's there at FPL, and again, the independent-owned utilities, working with the Florida Municipal Electric Association, with the Florida Electric Cooperative Association, all of them now, and again, that didn't happen. Before 2020, I'm getting my years run together here, before 2021, that would have been municipal electric helping municipal electric, cooperatives helping cooperatives, IOUs going with contractors, and IOUs as independent utilities. Now it's one team, one fight, everybody's in it. The governor's going to pay the bill. Let's just get the power back on. And that's a testament to what we do now in the state of Florida, and that is not done anywhere else in the country.
How many days supply should people have? I've heard 3, and then we went to 5. Are we at 7? What should we be expecting?
So I'll start. We at the state recommend 7, and the reason we recommend 7 is you just don't know what you don't know. It may be hard to get into you. And again, I'll take a storm like Tallahassee just experienced. Vegetation, heavy tree canopy. It is going to take a long time for us to get into and clear those roads, clear those electric lines. So we had power out for 5 to 7 days in portions of Tallahassee. if you are further away from, as Jamie was talking about, you're further away from those feeder lines, those high transmission lines, and you live, I'm trying to think of stuff here in Palm Beach. If you live in Pahokee, if you live in a rural portion of this county, it's going to take longer to get that power restored. So again, I think it's a combination. We recommend 7, but I think it's also a combination of knowing where you live, and if I'm off-grid remote, I'm going to need more. If I'm urban core, like right next to a hospital, then maybe I need less.
So, Kim, I've been talking about this for a long time, and I agree that people should have it 7 days. But the hard part about the 7 days is the water, right? Who wants to have gallons and gallons of water? But you don't need that. Is the thing. If what we can, this would be a fantastic statewide project. If talk about a place to put tax dollars anyway, is in reusable or inflatable water containers. So I have on my shelf these collapsible water containers I ordered from Amazon. And so they just sit there, and they're 5 and 10 gallon containers. So before a storm, I go over to the tap and I fill them up, and I don't have to schlep water around anywhere, right? As long as there's running water, I can fill them up, and they'll last. I could have weeks of water in these, handful of collapsible containers. So to me, that solves a lot of problems. If you don't have to carry around gallons of water.
Sounds like a new item for us at Hurricane Expos.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing about water is most people have heard about, do something in your bathtub, right? Fill your bathtub 3/4 full, whatever. But all you need is a painter's sheet, one of those plastic sheets that you lay down on the floor when you paint. Put that in the bathtub, then the water's not going to run out of the bathtub, and then fill it up 3/4 full. You don't want to have it too full because that could be structurally an issue. 3/4 full, and then you have water to flush the toilet, and then you have water to function. It'll last for a long time, right? So with those two really simple things that don't cost any money, you solve the water at home problem, and then you can worry about having food. And having a week's worth of tuna fish is not complicated, right? That's not hard, right? Tuna fish and protein bars or whatever. You can easily do that. It's the water thing that's the tricky one.
So let's walk through a scenario. Let's say a storm is coming. It's threatening South Florida, which we really have not had, like I said, a landfalling storm since David. And when in Broward and Miami-Dade, do you know when the last landfall?
Well, Hurricane Andrew obviously was a
okay,
Dade,
right.
but the thing is, it feels like, I should say this, it feels like we've had a lot of hurricanes, right? We haven't had them here in South Florida, and the hurricanes we've had that you really think of, Wilma, Francis, right? They were Category 2s, orders of magnitude weaker than the storms that used to hit here. In the first 7 decades of the 20th century, 7 hurricanes came over downtown Miami. And that didn't count the great Fort Lauderdale hurricane that would have caused tremendous devastation in unpopulated Pompano, Boca. Coral Springs didn't exist. All these places in where little tiny village of Delray and Boynton and all these places were little tiny places then when that giant hurricane came right over Fort Lauderdale. So hurricanes used to be a lot worse than we have experienced in our time here in terms of except for Hurricane Andrew. Hurricane Andrew obviously was off the charts in South Dade. But the thing about Hurricane Andrew was that it was so small, it was like a giant tornado, that people from North Dade, Broward, Palm Beach County could go down and help right away. In the Great Miami Hurricane of 1926, or if we had a 1928 hurricane, it was so big that everybody was affected. So you don't have the neighbors being able to help. Everybody was on their own, in their own communities, right? We haven't experienced that here, and that's part of history. That's part of our